Hello, my name is Ian Hartitz, lead fantasy expert at PFF, and I'm here to tell you today about 10 wide receivers that might be undervalued at ADP based on their projected targets. Got our PFF fantasy projections up there, and not the end-all, be-all. We want to look at things like upside, injury risk, potential situations. So not merely taking the projections and translating them over to the rankings, but can be a helpful guide and hopefully help show us where some of that late-round value lies. So first of all, I want to take a look at Washington Commanders. Now, wide receiver Jahan Dotson, the 16th overall pick in the 2022 NFL Draft. And the man's going outside the top 60 wide receivers, people. 105 projected targets, yet just the 63rd wide receiver off the board over at Underdog Fantasy. Now look, Dotson wasn't exactly someone that folks expected to go off the board as soon as he did. But you know what? Washington's opinion on him probably matters a little bit more than us. And once you start looking at what he was able to accomplish at Penn State, this is not your sub 6'4" slot only receiver. This is a man that can go up when contested catches. I mean, the stuff he did to Shaun Wade in those Ohio State games should not be consensual in continental United States. There is some competition. Terry McLaurin, we just saw him get paid. He'll be the number one in Washington. I understand Carson Wentz is the quarterback, but again, people, don't hate the player, hate the ADP. And Jahan Dotson's ADP is being priced at the absolute floor of what we should expect for someone with that sort of draft capital. So not here to hate on Curtis Samuel, but look, 16th overall pick, shouldn't need to tell you what their intentions are with them. OTA standout so far. I love getting Jahan Dotson right when the drafts are starting to get in the 12th, 13th round, regardless of the scoring format, but especially in PPR. Another wide receiver I'm loving right now at the price, Houston Texans rising second-year wide receiver Nico Collins. We project him for 95 targets, wide receiver 77 ADP over at Underdog Fantasy. So Nico wasn't the best first year, but we have this tendency when guys play through pain to not really give them the credit for doing so when maybe the results don't go exactly the way we wanted to. So looking at the Texans last year, again, Nico wasn't perfect, but did have shoulder, foot, and hip injuries throughout the year. And the one thing, if you happen to catch a few Texans games, don't blame me if you didn't, that we did see was Davis Mills actually show us a fantasy ceiling, right? I'm not sitting here and telling you that Davis Mills is going to be a next great real-life quarterback, but he threw for over 300 yards on 4 separate occasions. If you look at the rest of the league, Jalen Hurts only had 2 such games. Mac Jones only had 2. Ryan Tannehill had 2. Nico Collins is being set up to be the number 2 pass game option in an offense that will likely continue to be trailing again. Hence, lots of targets for a wide receiver, going 77th at his position right now. New York Giants wide receiver Kenny Golladay, another player that we probably just aren't giving enough credit to for playing through that pain last year. Hamstring injury in August, goes ahead, strains his hip in week 3, hyperextends his knee in week 5, finally suffers some bruised ribs. What was his reward after all this? He got to catch passes from Jake Fromm and freaking Mike the Giraffe Glennon. Now, Daniel Jones, I get it, not the biggest upgrade necessarily, but a new scheme with Brian DeBoll. The clapper is gone, and we project Kenny Golladay for 107 targets. ADP readily available as the wide receiver 57. I would also say Kadarius Toney at his ADP is being set up as a bargain. The Giants and Patriots receivers especially, everyone. In terms of just looking at the number 1 wide receivers on every team, Giants and Patriots are the cheapest by far right now in terms of their ADP. Don't be afraid to draft a player closer to their floor than their ceiling. Giants still have 72 million reasons why they should try to feed Kenny Golladay the ball whenever he is healthy enough to be on the field. Tampa Bay Buccaneers wide receiver Russell Gage. We see the ADP going up, but still sits as just the wide receiver 35 over Underdog Fantasy. We project him for 125 targets because Chris Godwin is not a guarantee to be back by week 1. In fact, a pup list is looking more likely by the week considering his ACL, which happened deep into last season, is an issue that medically could keep him on the field until October at the earliest, at the latest. And looking at November as a potential return, what exactly do the Buccaneers have to rush Godwin back for? Look at the state of the NFC South. Look at the $40 million guaranteed, $60 million total they just gave him. This is a team playing for January and February. So what they do to help ease this transition, they gave Russell Gage a 3-year, $30 million contract to be their number 2 while Godwin is out of the picture and be their wide receiver 3 the rest of the year. I mean, there's a chance when Godwin's back that we're still ranking Gage inside the top 36, right where he's going now. But while Godwin's out, don't be surprised if Gage is an absolute monster in full PPR leagues. Love getting him as my wide receiver 4 on fantasy squads of all shapes and sizes. Seahawks wide receiver Tyler Lockett. Again, bad quarterbacks are abound here. Not so much with Russell Gage, but several of these guys we've mentioned. Just remember, when the bad quarterback play is already being baked into their ADP, that's the sort of risk we can feel better about taking. And Tyler Lockett, I don't think anyone will disagree that he's one of the league's better wide receivers. 112 projected targets and sitting as just a wide receiver 46 over at Underdog Fantasy. So I'm not going to sit here and say he's better than DK Metcalf. I think we'd all take Metcalf over Lockett, but it's closer than most folks give it credit for. And right now, in the uncertain situation with two great wide receivers, let's take the cheapest one, all right? He had a 30 to 22 target lead over Metcalf in our 4 extended appearances with Geno Smith under center. And hey, maybe, just maybe, the 49ers feel confident enough about Trey Lance to send Jimmy G to their crosstown rival and give Metcalf and Lockett that quarterback grade that they're looking for. Either way, again, the concern for Lockett's fine. I have him ranked as my wide receiver 42, so I'm not sitting here telling you guys to take him in the top 5 rounds. You don't need to. 46 wide receiver off the board for someone projected well over 100 targets is a price I'm willing to pay. A couple others for you all. Atlanta Falcons wide receiver Drake London, 121 projected targets, wide receiver 37 ADP. Further we get removed from the draft, it just becomes a situation where, haven't talked about the guys for a while, maybe a little too worried about Marcus Mariota, and not giving enough credit to a top 10 overall pick whose problem was this idea that he can't separate. But take one look at Terry McLaurin's career in Washington to show the difference between a player not being able to separate and a player having a lot of contested catches because their quarterback put them in the position to have those contested catches in the first place. So Drake London, going as the wide receiver 37, projects to have more targets than anyone else on the Falcons, including Kyle Pitts, and might just be a freakish enough top 10 talent that he was drafted to be to go ahead and make some big noise early, despite, again, not the best situation under center with Mariota and or Desmond Ridder there. New England's Patriots wide receiver Jacoby Myers, 100 projected targets, wide receiver 61 ADP. Devontae Parker not going too much behind him. And again, these Giants and Patriots wide receivers, you're buying them so much closer to the floor than ceiling. I'm fine taking shots here. What if Mac Jones is just really good? He was at Alabama. He was as a rookie. Maybe the guy's really good. I want exposure to his number 1 wide receiver that had 50 additional targets over the next closest guy last year. Like, if there is a universe where Jacoby Myers can have even a normal touchdown rate, we're going to see him be a massive value, again, going outside the top 60 wide receivers in the league right now. Chicago Bears wide receiver Darnell Mooney, maybe a little bit more expensive than these other guys we're talking about, but this is someone that PFF projects for the 13th most targets in the entire league, 127 total, and still sitting there with the wide receiver 28 ADP. Only competition, old man Velus Jones and also Byron Pringle. Come on, guys. This is one of the most clear-cut number 1 pass game options in the entire NFL. God forbid Justin Fields in this new scheme makes the passing game look just a little bit better, and all of a sudden Mooney, you could argue, is being drafted, again, closer to his floor than his ceiling. You guys noticing a trend here with what we're trying to do? Carolina Panthers wide receiver Robbie Anderson. I saw the Instagram comment from March. He was not a huge fan of the Baker Mayfield trade rumors at that point, but this is still the number 2 wide receiver that has had, over the last 2 seasons, 136 and 110 targets, and he has the same head coach this time around. Panthers added no real wide receiver competition to discuss. Okay, Rashard Higgins, he can go fight with Terrence Marshall over that wide receiver 3 job. This remains the DJ Moore and Robbie Anderson show. Nobody on the Panthers had a larger rise through the ranks than Robbie Anderson getting that Baker Mayfield upgrade at quarterback. They can call it an open competition all they want. Baker Mayfield has been and still is better than Sam Darnold, and that is a positive for Anderson, who's going as the wide receiver 70. I mean, even in a scenario where, let's say, he gets traded, Panthers are done with him, they don't want him, you'd be hard-pressed to find many situations in the league. I'd say Baltimore's maybe one of them. Philly, you can find some loaded wide receiver depth charts, sure, but that wide receiver 70 floor, that's a situation that only has a chance to go up for a receiver that is just 1 year removed from a top 24 finish. I mean, think about it. DJ Moore, Robbie Anderson, Curtis Samuel, all top 25 fantasy receivers with Teddy Bridgewater under center just 2 years ago, feats that the Broncos' talented receivers couldn't even pull off. My final value, who is just too cheap right now based on their projected targets, Cincinnati Bengals wide receiver Tyler Boyd. The back-to-back wide receiver 36 in PPR points per game. Ceiling is much higher. He's actually gotten a chance to play 12 games without Jamar Chase or T. Higgins in the lineup. Not at the same time, but we had, the rookie year of Joe Burrow where Chase wasn't on the team yet. 2 games last year where Higgins was out. In those games, if you go ahead and just take Boyd's per game averages, extrapolate it to 17 games, 117 receptions for 1,226 yards, 6 touchdowns on 147 targets. Boyd is right there with Gage, with KJ Osborne, I'd say, on the Vikings, as the rare number 3 receiver, good enough to really take a step forward. God forbid one of their team's top 2 targets come along. And again, even with both these guys, especially last year, on the field the majority of the time, back-to-back wide receiver 36 finishes. Where's he going right now? Wide receiver 52. Don't be afraid to get complimentary pieces in one of the NFL's most prolific passing attacks. That is the Cincinnati Bengals. So again, everyone, Tyler Boyd, Robbie Anderson, Darnell Mooney, Jacoby Myers, Drake London, Tyler Lockett, Russell Gage, Kenny Golladay, Nico Collins, and Jahan Dotson. Don't be afraid to take highly projected target wide receivers late in your fantasy draft in the year 2022.